I don't know if anyone has had the same experience, but when I was younger, every time after I watch a saddest animation, I always get this feeling that I'd like to draw like that someday. And a few years later, now I can. At the time, the only Minecraft community that I was a part of was the He SMP, but to say the least, now my horizons have expanded. At the same time, we're going to be going in chronological order with our drawings, so we're going to be starting off with the He SMP. And how do I even begin to describe it? It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. I was 11 when I first started watching the He SMP, and yes, you can hazard a guess at my current age based off that information. It's been 5 years since then, and a lot has changed to say the least. Some things weren't meant to be. Some symphonies will remain forever unfinished. But even then, the He SMP holds a very special place in my heart for how it introduced me to internet culture, to so many amazing communities, to artists and creators with so much to give to the world, and it was the root of why I got back into Minecraft after abandoning it for 4 years. So it's only fitting that we start off with this special place, where men could go and emancipate. I actually went through a bunch of different iterations of this piece, and to say the least, I wasn't satisfied with any of them. It wasn't that they were bad per se, but they didn't really evoke the emotions I harbored towards the member. Sometimes it was because of the colours, sometimes because it was too abstract, and sometimes because it wasn't representational enough. So I looked back at some of the defining works that represented the peak of the He SMP, and it gave me some rather interesting insights. For one, certain colours represented Lemambert much better than others. If one were to paint Lemambert entirely in hues in green, for instance, it wouldn't work, not only because green was representative of dream, but also because of how green represented life, which Lemambert could never sustain. All the green in Lemambert burned into orange, bled into red, screamed into yellow, rained into blue, faded into grey, and withered into black. Green and purple had no place in Lemambert. If you look at Sadist's animations, you'll see all of these colour symbolisms everywhere. It was really eye-opening to me, to be honest. But what really gave me a solid idea of what I wanted to draw was this painting by Vasily Kandinsky, On White 2, or Old Vice 2. Despite being abstract, or perhaps precisely because it didn't represent anything in particular, it really reminded me of Lemambert. The colours were all Lemambert. There was no green, no purple, just raw, scrappy emotions patched together in a jagged fashion atop one another to create a basis. The lines at the sides were reminiscent of a staff of a music score, of accompaniments that were never quite finished. And the cross in the middle, combined with the mere outline of a circle that intersected it, evoked a conclusive finality, just like the obsidian grid. Maybe I was reading too much into it, but it worked out in the end. In any case, onto the actual artwork. I wanted the painting to be from a worm's eye view rather than a bird's eye view, or even frontal, because it felt more fitting that the perspective aimed towards the sky, like Lemambert always did. The initial colour palette that I went with was based off this picture of Crater Lake, but I wasn't fully satisfied with it, so it got tweaked slightly. Now, I knew for a fact that I wanted to incorporate the Lemambert flag into the composition in some way or another, but every time I tried to draw it, it always looked off. Sometimes it didn't fit the perspective well enough, and sometimes it looked too high for a flag of a fallen country. So after drawing the obsidian grid, I scrapped the idea of the flag being in the sky. Instead, I got the idea to make it look as if it was bleeding into the water, as if the dye that made up the flag was running and slowly getting dissolved. It felt more fitting than having the flag fly high in the air, in a sense. I wasn't fully satisfied with the colours that I chosen, so I first made it more blue before going the opposite direction and making it more yellow. However, it made the piece look a little bit too desaturated, so I added some colours to the flag and the obsidian grid, made some parts of the sky a little bit more yellow, and added a couple of downward brush strokes to make it look like even the sky was playing downwards. I went to take a picture of my iPad to document the process, but when I did so, I realised that the light that reflected off my screen actually made the piece look more cohesive. So I ended up transferring that reflection of light into the actual piece itself, and this was how the base sketch turned out. All that was left to do was clean things up, add a couple more highlights, and we were done. So this took about 2 hours. I'm actually pretty satisfied with how this turned out, even though I think that the line weights for the obsidian grid could be varied a little bit more. But even then, I also did some other sketches prior to doing that particular artwork, so I was ideating the composition and the colour scheme of the Lemambert artwork. I was thinking about what sort of flower would represent Lemambert best, and I came up with Morning Glory. It's one of the flowers that's mentioned in Passerine alongside the yellow rose and the blue iris, and I thought it's pretty fitting for Lemamba since, it never lasts. And then we have the shark fan, which is just funny, to be honest, as well as the Lemamba flag itself. There's some unfinished sketches at the background, like this crow and the button room and the walls, but I'm probably not going to finish them because we've got another sketch that we should get on to. Now, before I introduce the next build that we're going to draw, here's a bit of story time. June 1st, 2022 had not been the best of days. I first saw the news at about 5 in the evening, and it was the first time that I cried because of a person I'd never known. It wouldn't be the last, unfortunately, but more to the point, I wasn't exactly sure what to do that night. I couldn't sleep. Then I remember a name that my friends had only mentioned in passing, a name of which my only knowledge was from a Chloe Does Things video and a Tommy in It video. Looking back at it 2 years later, it was frankly ridiculous how little I knew about Grian. Regardless, I searched up Grian's channel at 10 PM, went to his playlists, and clicked on the earliest Hermitcraft video I could find. 3 seasons, 212 episodes, all in 3 days, because I was a 13-year-old with far more free time than I have now, and I needed to take my mind off things. So I went from there. When I was deciding on which Hermitcraft build to draw, I was stuck, to say the least. When it came to the Dream SMP, the man-bug was a given because of the sheer emotional weight that it carried. But for Hermitcraft, everything stood out. Every build in Hermitcraft was the fruit of a single person's, or sometimes multiple people's hard work. They could represent the creator's dreams, or their mastery over the game, or the coincidental combinations of collaborative effort. So, for about a week, I was stuck. Until I remember how it started, and it was an easy choice from there. Grian's Ship in a Bottle, his first build on Hermitcraft. It isn't necessarily his best build, nor is it my favourite. That would probably be the Barge or the Entity. But it was the only build that I remember the building process of clearly, despite not having watched that particular episode in 3 years. So I got to work. Though there were some hiccups along the making of the composition, it was fairly easy to get a rough idea of what I wanted to draw. Unlike the Lemamba piece, which I wanted to be as emotional as it was representational, I didn't have to worry about making as much of an emotional statement with this particular drawing, mostly because I didn't associate as strong an emotion with this build as I did with Lemamba. The Ship in a Bottle was ultimately experimental, more of a prelude to Grian's actual base in future builds, rather than a statement on its own. So it didn't take long before the base sketch was done. The same was said for the colours. At first, I wanted to use blue as the main colour, but quickly switched that to a nice shade of sea green to make it more natural. And when it came to rendering, I decided not to use a reference. And yes, perhaps not using a reference when drawing glass of all things wasn't the brightest idea, considering how difficult it can be to get reflections right. But for some reason, I find it difficult to use references for digital drawings, so I don't. And I think it still turned out alright in the end. Along the way, I also added some white in the foreground to make the bottle stand out a little more, and to make the piece a little more dynamic. Art doesn't have to be like a photograph, where every part of the picture is filled with something. Sometimes, having negative space can work in your favour. I continued to work on the bottle, adding highlights and shadows to make it a little more detailed, before deciding to add some fish, kelp, and a starfish in the foreground. And with that, we were done. Alright, this took about just over an hour, and while it's not as visceral as the Lemamba piece, I still quite like it. The only issue is that you can't really see the ship, and there was always a choice between compromising on the light or the ship, because they're somewhat mutually exclusive. The ship will block out the light, and the light will block out the ship. So I don't think I could have done much better than that. But in any case, it's on to the next build. But before we do that, you'll likely need a little more context behind the next build that we'll be drawing. If you're watching this, you've definitely heard of Hermitcraft and the He SMP, so I didn't have to explain much about those builds. But while major SMPs tend to take up the vast majority of one's recommended feed, there's a lot more to this community than you expect. If you've heard of Snapple, Solusus of Gooses, or Bismuth Leaf, that's great. They're all amazing pioneers in Minecraft building. What about I Hate Falling Blocks, Jam Pop Bong, Jade Cougar, or even I Eat Cheesecake? They all have amazing upload schedules, especially considering that they aren't full-time YouTubers, and the video quality is top-notch as well. And despite not getting nearly as much recognition as other Minecraft YouTubers, they still go on. So with all that being said, the last build that we're going to be drawing is by Colour Tongue, a small Minecraft YouTuber who puts a lot of work into his craft. He's made 6 pieces of music for his Minecraft videos, which is 6 more than most do, and he puts graffiti art in Minecraft for his subscribers. In the Artists Collective, which is one of 2 SMPs that he's in, he's building a city based off Rio de Janeiro called Shell City, named after the shulker shells that the city produces. Not only is the build amazing, but even making a South American themed build is ridiculously rare, considering how Eurocentric Minecraft builds tend to be. All in all, it's a really unique build that deserves more recognition, so that's why I decided to draw it. Unlike the previous artworks, where I changed the dimensions of the canvas spontaneously, I wanted this piece to have the aspect ratio of a photograph taken on a digital camera, which was 3:2, so that corresponded to 3000 by 2000 pixels. I experimented between a landscape and a portrait orientation before deciding on the latter, and then it was time for the base colours. To be honest, I had no plan when it came to this particular piece. I was originally planning to take inspiration from this book on anime architecture that I had, but as I said before, I do use references well. At the same time, I had a vague idea of what I wanted to draw, so I went with bright colours for the base, then darkened the shadows to emphasise them a little more. Then I remembered that there had been a duck statue based on Jesus the Redeemer that had been placed in Shell City as part of a prank, so I had to include it in the drawing. I also didn't feel that the painting was colourful enough, so I added a bit of magenta at the fringes. Then came the street lamps and a few green highlights, and it was then that I realised that the piece was looking rather Spider-Verse-esque, so I used the brush to mimic half-tone dots and touched up a couple more details, and with that, we are done with our last piece. Alright, so this took about 1.5 hours. It looks a bit unfinished, but I'm still alright with it. I do like the colours and how they meld together. Although this was supposed to be a clothes shop, and it's not very apparent because, well, I did try to make a mannequin at the same time, it still didn't really turn out like a clothes shop. You can also see the cross hatching at the top, and it just really gives off that sort of CYMK effect, which is also the overall colour palette that this picture has. I know I didn't include a lot of pictures of Shell City, so if you'd like to check it out, go check out Colour's channel. And with that, I suppose we're done with all the drawings. Thanks so much for watching. I know this isn't my typical type of content, considering how I don't show much of my drawings on this channel. But if you'd like me to make more drawings of Minecraft builds, then let me know. It doesn't even have to be of Minecraft builds, strictly speaking. I don't always have the skill or platforms required to make and showcase these sort of drawings, so I'm quite grateful that I do now. Thank you once again, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!